The heavy wooden doors of the Hamilton County Courthouse swung open as I stepped inside, clutching two battered manila folders against my chest. My only professional suit, a navy blue number I'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago, still bore a faint coffee stain on the left sleeve from this morning's rushed breakfast. The courtroom was packed, and every head turned as my worn heels clicked against the polished marble floor. There at the plaintiff's table sat my parents, Margaret and Robert, their expressions dripping with condescension as they rolled their eyes in perfect unison. My brother Derek lounged in the gallery, his smirk widening as he took in my appearance. Their high-powered attorney, Vincent Hayes, shuffled through a stack of legal documents looking every bit the part of someone ready to devour me whole. The conservatorship petition lay open before them, my $5 million trust fund itemized like a grocery list. Mom's words from last week still echoed in my mind. "You've never been good with money, Allison." I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and announced to Judge Thompson, "Your Honor, I've passed the bar exam." Derek's face went white as fresh snow. 6 months earlier, my life looked completely different. I was pulling double shifts at Murphy's Diner on Maple Street, serving coffee and scrambled eggs to truckers and night shift workers who tipped in quarters and crumpled dollar bills. My studio apartment above the dry cleaner barely had room for a bed and a hot plate, but it was mine. The trust fund my grandfather left me sat locked away like a fortress inaccessible until my 30th birthday, though my parents controlled emergency withdrawals for what they deemed appropriate expenses. Everything changed the night Derek stumbled into the diner at 2 a.m, his face bruised and his hands shaking. He owed $50,000 to people who collected debts with crowbars and baseball bats, the kind of people who didn't negotiate payment plans. Through tears and whispered confessions, he admitted he'd been borrowing against my trust fund for months, forging documents and manipulating our parents into believing the withdrawals were for my irresponsible spending habits. Our parents discovered my secret the following week. For 3 years, I'd been attending law school through night classes at the community college, studying corporate law and trust administration while slinging hash browns and wiping down tables. Margaret found my textbooks hidden under my mattress during what she called a wellness check, but what felt more like a home invasion. The family meeting that followed was a masterclass in manipulation. Margaret sat across from me in their pristine living room, her manicured fingers drumming against her coffee cup. "Allison, sweetheart, you're a dreamer. You always have been. Remember when you wanted to be a veterinarian or a marine biologist, you never follow through with anything." Robert nodded gravely from his leather recliner, his reading glasses perched on his nose like a judge's gavel. "We're concerned about your decision-making abilities. Law school is expensive and you're already struggling financially. How can we trust you with millions of dollars when you can't even afford decent clothes?" Derek sat silent in the corner, his guilt masked by false concern. He'd coached them well, feeding them carefully crafted lies about my supposed financial irresponsibility, while bleeding my inheritance dry to fund his gambling addiction. "We're filing for conservatorship," Margaret announced, her voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. "It's for your own protection, dear. The courts will see that we only have your best interests at heart." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I accelerated my bar exam timeline, studying 18 hours a day while maintaining my work schedule. Murphy, the gruff Irish owner of the diner, became my unlikely ally. He'd let me study during slow hours, bringing me coffee and leftover pie while I memorized contract law and civil procedure. "You got fight in you, kid," he'd say, refilling my cup for the dozenth time. "Don't let nobody tell you different." My study group friends from law school rallied around me too. Sarah, a single mother pursuing family law, would quiz me on constitutional amendments while we changed her baby's diaper between classes. Marcus, a former construction worker studying criminal justice, helped me practice oral arguments in the diner's back room after hours. But the real revelation came when I discovered Derek's theft. Bank records showed systematic withdrawals over 18 months, each one labeled as Allison emergency funds, or educational expenses. My parents had signed off on every single transaction, believing Derek's fabricated stories about my imaginary financial disasters. They thought they were saving me from my own poor judgment, never realizing they were enabling his destruction of our family's future. The irony was suffocating. While they questioned my fitness to manage money, they'd handed control to someone who'd gambled away his own inheritance and was steadily draining mine. The next 3 months became a blur of covert preparation. I worked every shift Murphy would give me, sometimes pulling 16-hour days to afford the bar exam fees and legal research materials. My fingers grew calloused from washing dishes and taking orders, but my mind stayed sharp, absorbing legal precedents and case law like a sponge. The real breakthrough came through Professor Patricia Caldwell, my constitutional law instructor. A retired judge with silver hair and fierce intelligence, she'd taken an interest in my unusual circumstances. One evening after class, she pulled me aside with information that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my family's legal history. "Your grandfather was a brilliant man, Allison. Nathan Hartwell came to see me 30 years ago, concerned about potential future disputes over his estate. He specifically asked about protections against conservatorship abuse." Professor Caldwell handed me a manila envelope she'd kept in her office safe for 3 decades. Inside were photocopies of additional legal documents my grandfather had filed separately from his main will. These papers outlined specific protections for his grandchildren, including language that would make conservatorship nearly impossible to obtain without clear evidence of genuine incapacity. "He suspected your father might struggle with money management," she explained. "Robert was already showing signs of poor business judgment back then. Nathan wanted to ensure his grandchildren's inheritance couldn't be touched by family members with their own financial troubles." The safety deposit box key hidden in these documents led me to First National Bank, where Tom Morrison, the elderly bank manager, remembered my grandfather fondly. The box contained even more detailed records, including correspondence between Nathan and his attorney discussing his concerns about future family dynamics. "Your grandfather was worried about your brother's gambling even as a teenager." Morrison explained his weathered hands carefully handling the decades-old documents. He set up multiple safeguards, including provisions that would transfer full control to you immediately if anyone attempted to manipulate the trust for personal gain. Meanwhile, Derek's situation deteriorated rapidly. His creditors grew more aggressive, calling our parents home at all hours and making veiled threats about consequences for unpaid debts. Margaret started taking anxiety medication, while Robert's blood pressure climbed dangerously high from the stress. Vincent Hayes, the family attorney they'd hired, commanded fees of $800 per hour. His reputation for winning conservatorship cases was legendary, built on his ability to present families as concerned protectors rather than opportunistic manipulators. He specialized in making adult children appear incompetent, unstable, or dangerous to their own financial well-being. I spent nights in the diner after closing time, surrounded by law books and legal briefs, building my understanding of trust administration and conservatorship law. Murphy would lock up around midnight, leaving me with the keys and instructions to turn off the lights when I finished. The fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead as I traced the connections between my grandfather's protective measures and the current legal assault on my inheritance. The most devastating discovery came through careful analysis of family financial records. My grandfather's original trust had been worth nearly $8 million when he died. Through careful investment and compound interest, it should have grown to well over $12 million by now. Instead, it barely held $5 million, and I began to understand why. Derek hadn't just stolen from my portion. He'd been systematically raiding the entire family estate for years, with our parents' unwitting cooperation. They'd approved withdrawal after withdrawal, believing his stories about emergency medical bills, educational expenses, and investment opportunities. Each lie had cost our family hundreds of thousands of dollars money that disappeared into casinos, sports books, and private poker games. As I pieced together the financial puzzle, Derek's desperation made perfect sense. The conservatorship wasn't just about accessing my inheritance. It was about gaining legal control over the trust before anyone discovered the full extent of his theft. Once he had power of attorney over my finances, he could manipulate the books to hide his crimes and continue bleeding the estate dry. My parents remained completely unaware of the true scope of Derek's deception. They genuinely believed they were protecting me from my own poor judgment, never suspecting that their son had orchestrated this entire crisis to cover his tracks and fund his addictions. The month before the hearing, my family's behavior shifted from concerned to desperate. Margaret started telling neighbors and family friends that I was having a mental health crisis, explaining my law school attendance as a symptom of grandiose delusions about my capabilities. She'd shake her head sadly while describing my unrealistic fantasies about becoming an attorney. Robert began calling my landlord Mr. Chen with increasingly elaborate stories about my supposed instability. He claimed I'd been making irrational financial decisions and exhibiting erratic behavior that concerned the entire family. Mr. Chen, a kind man who'd always appreciated my punctual rent payments, listened politely but grew suspicious when Robert suggested he should consider evicting me for my own safety. The legal maneuvering intensified when Vincent Hayes filed an emergency motion for temporary conservatorship, claiming I posed an immediate threat to my own financial security. The motion cited my law school enrollment as evidence of impulsive decision-making and grandiose self-perception inconsistent with realistic self-assessment of capabilities. Derek's role in the conspiracy became clearer when I discovered he'd been coaching our parents on specific language to use in their testimonies. He'd researched conservatorship law himself, identifying keywords and phrases that would strengthen their petition. Terms like financial irresponsibility, impulsive behavior, and unrealistic career goals appeared repeatedly in their sworn statements. The most heartbreaking betrayal came from Dr. Sandra Walsh, a family friend who'd known me since childhood. Margaret and Robert pressured her to write a psychiatric evaluation supporting their claims about my mental state. Dr. Walsh, who'd never treated me professionally and had only seen me at family gatherings, struggled with the ethical implications of their request. She called me directly, her voice heavy with conflict. "Allison, your parents are asking me to state that you're showing signs of mental illness. I can't do that in good conscience. You've always struck me as intelligent and level-headed, but they're very convincing about their concerns." Derek's creditors escalated their pressure tactics, visiting our parents' home and making explicit threats about what would happen if the debt remained unpaid. Tony Ricci, a heavy-set man with gold teeth and expensive suits, made it clear that Derek's family would be held responsible for his obligations. "Your boy owes us money," he told Robert during a visit that left our father pale and shaking. "Money's got to come from somewhere. Family's got money. Family pays the debt. That's how this works." Margaret's marriage began cracking under the pressure. She accused Robert of enabling Derek's gambling by providing him with credit cards and cash advances over the years. Robert countered that she'd been equally naive about their son's activities, pointing out that she'd signed off on numerous suspicious expenses without question. Their fights grew louder and more frequent, centered around blame for Derek's addiction and their deteriorating financial situation. The irony wasn't lost on me that they questioned my money management skills while their own household teetered on the brink of financial collapse. I discovered that Derek had stolen my law books and bar exam materials from my apartment during a visit when I was working at the diner. He'd used a spare key our parents had given him, claiming he was concerned about my well-being. The materials ended up in a dumpster behind his apartment building, a petty act of sabotage meant to derail my legal preparation. Marcus from my study group helped me retrieve what we could, and Sarah shared her own materials to replace what had been destroyed. Their loyalty stood in sharp contrast to my blood family's betrayal, showing me that chosen family could be stronger than biological bonds. The revelation that Derek had orchestrated the entire conservatorship plan came through careful analysis of the timeline. Every legal move, every family meeting, every pressure tactic aligned perfectly with his escalating debts and increasing desperation. He'd manipulated our parents' genuine love and concern, twisting their protective instincts into weapons against me. Vincent Hayes represented not only our family, but also several of Derek's creditors, a conflict of interest so blatant it bordered on legal malpractice. He'd positioned himself to benefit regardless of the conservatorship outcome, collecting fees from multiple parties while advancing Derek's agenda. As the hearing date approached, I realized that winning wouldn't just require defending myself against conservatorship. I'd need to expose the entire web of deception that had entangled our family, revealing truths that would destroy relationships and shatter illusions that had protected my parents' peace of mind for years. The question wasn't whether I could prove my competence. The question was whether I could handle the aftermath of revealing how thoroughly Derek had manipulated and betrayed everyone who loved him. 2 weeks before the hearing, I received my bar exam results in a plain white envelope that trembled in my hands as I opened it. The single word, pass, might as well have been written in gold. While my family assumed I'd failed based on their expectations of my capabilities, I was now a licensed attorney in the state of Ohio, fully qualified to represent myself in court. Professor Caldwell helped me understand the true scope of Vincent Hayes' conflicts of interest. His law firm had represented 3 of Derek's major creditors in unrelated matters, creating an impossible web of competing loyalties. More damning, Hayes had advised Derek on debt restructuring strategies 6 months earlier, establishing an attorney-client relationship that should have disqualified him from representing our parents. My private investigation into the family's finances revealed layers of deception that went back years. Margaret had been hiding her own gambling addiction, making weekly trips to the riverboat casinos in Cincinnati, where she'd lost over $200,000 in the past 18 months. The money had come from joint accounts she shared with Robert, funds she'd convinced him were going toward household expenses and charitable donations. Robert's construction business was hemorrhaging money due to cost overruns and poor project management. He'd been borrowing against the family's assets to cover payroll and materials using my trust fund as collateral without my knowledge. His company owed nearly $300,000 to suppliers and subcontractors, many of whom had filed liens against properties owned by our family. The interconnected web of financial dysfunction painted a clear picture. Derek's gambling debts were just the most visible symptom of a family-wide pattern of financial irresponsibility and deception. Each member had been hiding their own money problems while pointing fingers at others, and my trust fund represented their collective salvation. Judge William Sterling, my grandfather's former business partner, provided crucial historical context about the family dynamics Nathan had witnessed decades earlier. Now retired from the bench, Sterling remembered conversations where my grandfather expressed concerns about his son's business judgment and his grandson's developing gambling habits. Nathan saw the writing on the wall, Sterling explained during a meeting at his downtown law office. He structured that trust specifically to prevent family members from raiding it during times of financial stress. The protections he built in were designed for exactly this situation. Maria Santos, the court clerk who'd processed hundreds of conservatorship cases, helped me understand the typical patterns judges looked for when evaluating these petitions. Families often presented united fronts based on carefully coached testimonies, but experienced judges could spot inconsistencies and ulterior motives. "The key is documentation," she explained while reviewing my case files. Judges want to see objective evidence of incapacity, not just family testimony about concerning behavior. Medical records, financial disasters, documented mental illness. Without those, conservatorship becomes much harder to justify. Jake Mueller, the private investigator I'd hired with money saved from diner tips, uncovered the smoking gun that would transform our case. Derek had been systematically forging my signature on financial documents for over 2 years, creating a paper trail that supposedly showed reckless spending and poor money management. The forged documents had been used to justify withdrawals from my trust fund, creating artificial evidence of financial irresponsibility. Your brother's gotten good at copying your handwriting. Mueller reported spreading photocopies across his desk. But handwriting analysis will show these signatures are fake. More importantly, the purchases these documents claim you made never actually happened. The money went straight into Derek's accounts and then to casinos and bookmakers. The falsified medical records came next. Margaret had convinced Dr. Walsh to write a preliminary assessment suggesting I might benefit from psychological evaluation, but she'd altered the language to make it sound like a formal diagnosis of mental instability. The original document recommended counseling for stress management. The version filed with the court suggested serious mental health concerns requiring immediate intervention. My alliance with court-appointed psychiatrist Dr. Eleanor Reynolds became crucial when she agreed to conduct an independent evaluation of my mental state. Dr. Reynolds had 30 years of experience evaluating conservatorship cases and possessed an uncanny ability to distinguish between genuine mental illness and family manipulation. Your test results indicate above-average intelligence, excellent judgment, and no signs of mental illness or impairment, she concluded after hours of psychological testing. In fact, your decision to pursue legal education while working full-time shows remarkable focus and determination. If anything, you demonstrate superior planning and goal achievement abilities. As Derek's creditors grew more aggressive, their threats extended to my parents' physical safety. Tony Ricci made it clear that the family had 1 week to produce $50,000 or face consequences that went beyond financial penalties. Margaret started sleeping with a baseball bat beside her bed, while Robert installed a security system that monitored every entrance to their home. The pressure was breaking Derek. He'd lost weight, developed a nervous tic, and started drinking heavily to cope with his mounting anxiety. His desperation made him sloppy, and I began intercepting communications between him and Vincent Hayes that revealed the true scope of their coordination. In recorded phone calls that Jake Mueller helped me obtain legally, Derek explicitly discussed using the conservatorship to access my full inheritance and restructure the family's collective debts. Hayes advised him on legal strategies for presenting me as incompetent while protecting Derek from criminal charges related to his forgery and theft. "Once we get control of her money, we can clean up this whole mess," Derek told Hayes during a call that would later be played in court. "My parents don't need to know how much I actually took. We just need to get her declared incompetent, and then I can fix the books." The trap was set. I had evidence of fraud, forgery, conflicts of interest, and conspiracy. But the hardest part lay ahead, presenting this evidence in court while watching my family's carefully constructed lies crumble in front of a packed courtroom. My parents still believed they were protecting me from my own poor judgment. They had no idea that their son had manipulated their love into a weapon designed to destroy my future and conceal his crimes. The truth would devastate them, but silence would destroy me. The night before the hearing, I sat in Murphy's diner with my evidence folders, double-checking every document and rehearsing my arguments. Murphy brought me coffee and apple pie, settling into the booth across from me with the wisdom of someone who'd seen enough life to understand its complexities. "Sometimes the hardest thing about growing up," he said, "is learning that the people who raised you are just as flawed and frightened as everybody else. Takes real courage to stand up when family's counting on you to stay down." His words carried me through the sleepless night and into the courthouse the next morning, where my family's shocked expressions told me they'd never expected me to fight back with this level of preparation and legal firepower. Judge Patricia Thompson's courtroom buzzed with tension as proceedings began at 9 o'clock sharp. The Honorable Judge Thompson, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes, had built her reputation on cutting through family drama to reach legal truth. Her bailiff announced the case, Hartwell versus Hartwell petition for conservatorship. Vincent Hayes stood with practiced confidence, his $1,000 suit and gold cufflinks broadcasting success and authority. He'd arranged his documents in perfect order, each exhibit marked and ready for presentation. Margaret and Robert sat behind him, dressed in their Sunday best, hands folded, and expressions carefully composed to project concerned parental love. "Your Honor." Hayes began his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of legal experience. "We come before this court with heavy hearts. The Hartwell family seeks conservatorship over their daughter, Allison, not out of malice or financial motivation, but out of genuine concern for her welfare and future security." He painted a picture of a young woman spiraling out of control, making impulsive decisions that threatened her financial stability. Law school enrollment without family consultation, erratic work schedules, sudden changes in living arrangements, a pattern of behavior that suggested poor judgment and possibly underlying mental health issues. Mrs. Hartwell will testify that her daughter has always struggled with realistic self-assessment. Hayes continued, "She's pursued multiple career paths without completing any of them. She's shown little understanding of money management and has made financial decisions that concern the entire family." Margaret took the witness stand with tears already forming in her eyes. She'd practiced this performance for weeks, coached by Derek on specific incidents to emphasize and language that would support the conservatorship petition. Allison has always been a dreamer. She testified, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. When she was 16, she wanted to be a veterinarian, but she wouldn't study biology. At 18, she planned to become a marine biologist, but she's afraid of deep water. Last year, she decided she wanted to be a lawyer, but she's never shown any interest in legal matters. Margaret's testimony painted me as flighty and unrealistic, someone who jumped from dream to dream without the persistence or practical skills to achieve any of them. She described finding law books in my apartment as evidence of another impractical fantasy, not recognizing the years of dedication behind my legal education. "We're worried about what will happen when she inherits millions of dollars," Margaret continued. "She's never managed more than a few $100s at a time. She doesn't understand investments, taxes, or long-term financial planning. We're afraid she'll lose everything through poor decisions or people who might take advantage of her generous nature." Robert's testimony focused on my supposed financial irresponsibility. He presented bank records showing irregular income from my diner job and described my living situation as evidence of poor life planning. "Allison lives in a studio apartment above a dry cleaner," he told the court with genuine sadness in his voice. "She works as a waitress despite having access to family resources that could provide for a better life. We've offered to help her find more stable employment or pursue practical education, but she insists on doing things her own way." Derek's coach testimony proved the most painful. My own brother, the one I'd protected from bullies as children and supported through countless personal crises, portrayed me as unstable and potentially dangerous to myself. "My sister has always had trouble accepting reality," he said, avoiding my eyes as he spoke. "She makes these grand plans but never follows through. When things don't work out, she blames everyone else instead of recognizing her own limitations. I'm worried that access to millions of dollars might enable behaviors that could hurt her in the long run." Vincent Hayes presented medical records that had been carefully edited to suggest mental health concerns. Dr. Walsh's stress management recommendations became evidence of psychological instability. My academic records from community college were framed as proof that I lacked the intellectual capacity for legal studies. "Your Honor, we ask this court to recognize what the family has known for years," Hayes concluded. "Allison Hartwell is a loving, well-intentioned young woman who needs protection from her own impulses and poor judgment. Conservatorship will ensure that her grandfather's generous gift provides security and stability, rather than enabling destructive behavior patterns." The courtroom fell silent as Hayes returned to his seat. Judge Thompson's expression remained neutral, but I caught her glance toward my evidence folders with what might have been curiosity. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly smoothing my thrift store suit and walking to the front of the courtroom with steady steps. Every eye followed me, family members and spectators alike, waiting to see how a waitress with delusions of legal grandeur would respond to such devastating testimony. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and confident. My name is Allison Hartwell, and I am a licensed attorney in the state of Ohio. I passed the bar examination 3 weeks ago and am fully qualified to represent myself in these proceedings. The gasps echoed through the courtroom. Derek's face went white as understanding dawned. Margaret and Robert exchanged confused looks, unable to process this development that contradicted everything they'd been told about my capabilities. I'd like to begin my response by addressing the court's attention to several critical facts that were omitted from the petitioner's testimony. I continued opening my first evidence folder. Facts that reveal the true motivation behind this conservatorship petition and expose a pattern of fraud, forgery, and financial manipulation that has been ongoing for years. Judge Thompson leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "Proceed, counselor." The word counselor rang through the courtroom like a bell, announcing that the dynamics of this case had just shifted dramatically. I was no longer the incompetent daughter in need of protection. I was an attorney prepared to defend my rights and expose the truth about my family's hidden agenda. Vincent Hayes' confidence wavered as he realized he was now facing a qualified legal opponent rather than a confused young woman. Derek slumped in his seat, knowing that his carefully constructed house of lies was about to collapse around him. Margaret and Robert still looked confused, not yet understanding how drastically their son had manipulated them, or how completely their case was about to unravel. The real battle was just beginning. I approached the witness stand with the measured confidence of someone who had spent months preparing for this moment. Judge Thompson's keen eyes followed my movement as I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd be the first person in this courtroom to do exactly that. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that will demonstrate not only my competence to manage my own affairs, but also reveal the fraudulent foundation upon which this conservatorship petition has been built. I announced opening my first folder. The initial document I presented was my law school transcript, showing 3 years of night classes completed while working full-time with a grade point average of 3.8. Judge Thompson examined the records carefully, noting the challenging course load and consistent academic performance. These transcripts show that the defendant has successfully completed a rigorous legal education program while maintaining steady employment, I stated. This demonstrates planning dedication and the ability to balance multiple responsibilities, hardly the profile of someone incapable of managing her own affairs. Next came the financial forensics that would devastate Derek's carefully constructed narrative. Lisa Morgan, the forensic accountant I'd hired, had traced every withdrawal from my trust fund over the past 2 years. Her analysis revealed a systematic pattern of theft disguised as legitimate expenses. Your Honor, I present evidence showing that my brother, Derek Hartwell, has stolen approximately $430,000 from my trust fund through forged documents and falsified expense reports. I announced handing copies to the court clerk. The forgery evidence hit like a bomb. Document after document showed Derek's increasingly confident attempts to replicate my signature authorizing withdrawals for expenses I'd never incurred. The handwriting analysis performed by certified experts proved beyond doubt that these signatures were fake. These documents supposedly show my authorization for luxury car purchases, expensive jewelry, and exotic vacations. I explained displaying enlarged copies of the forged signatures. However, bank records will show that this money went directly into Derek Hartwell's personal accounts and from there to various gambling establishments. Derek's face had gone from white to green as the evidence mounted. Vincent Hayes frantically shuffled through his papers, realizing that his client had lied to him about the source and accuracy of the financial documents supporting their case. The audio recordings proved even more damaging. Jake Mueller had obtained legal recordings of conversations between Derek and his creditors, including explicit discussions about using my inheritance to pay his gambling debts. Your Honor, I'd like to play a recorded conversation between Derek Hartwell and Anthony Ricci, dated 3 weeks ago, I announced. The courtroom fell silent as Derek's voice filled the air, desperate and pleading. "Tony, you gotta give me more time. My sister's got millions coming to her and we're setting up a conservatorship so I can access the money. Once that goes through, I can pay you everything I owe plus interest." The recording continued with Derek describing his plan to manipulate the legal system and steal my inheritance. His words revealed not only his theft, but also his complete understanding of the conservatorship process and his role in orchestrating it. Margaret gasped audibly as understanding finally dawned. Her son hadn't been protecting the family from my poor judgment. He'd been manipulating her maternal instincts to help him commit fraud on a massive scale. But Derek's crimes were just the beginning. My investigation had uncovered financial problems throughout the entire family that painted a very different picture of who needed protection from poor money management. Your Honor, I present evidence that Robert Hartwell's construction business has been operating at a loss for 18 months and currently owes over $300,000 to suppliers and creditors. I continued producing business records that Robert had thought were confidential. The evidence showed that Robert had been using my trust fund as collateral for business loans without my knowledge or consent, creating liens against assets that legally belonged to me. His poor business decisions had put my inheritance at risk, while he questioned my financial judgment. Margaret's secret gambling addiction provided the final devastating revelation. Casino records showed weekly visits to riverboat gambling establishments with losses totaling over $200,000 in 18 months. Money had been diverted from household accounts to fund her addiction, while she accused me of financial irresponsibility. The evidence shows that every member of the petitioning family has demonstrated serious financial mismanagement. I stated organizing the documents for Judge Thompson's review. Robert Hartwell has driven his business into bankruptcy. Margaret Hartwell has lost hundreds of thousands of dollars through gambling addiction. Derek Hartwell has stolen from family trust funds to support his own gambling habits. Vincent Hayes attempted damage control, objecting to the relevance of the family's financial history, but Judge Thompson overruled him with a sharp look that suggested his credibility had been completely destroyed. The conflicts of interest evidence finished dismantling their case. Court records showed that Hayes had represented 3 of Derek's major creditors in separate legal matters, while simultaneously advising our family on the conservatorship petition. Mr. Hayes has been collecting fees from multiple parties with conflicting interests, I explained. He's been paid by Derek's creditors to help them collect debts while simultaneously being paid by my parents to pursue conservatorship that would give Derek access to money needed to pay those same debts. Dr. Reynolds took the witness stand to present her psychological evaluation, providing professional testimony that demolished any suggestion of mental incapacity or poor judgment on my part. Ms. Hartwell demonstrates superior intelligence, excellent planning abilities, and no signs of mental illness or impairment, she testified. Her decision to pursue legal education while maintaining employment shows remarkable focus and determination. In my professional opinion, she is not only competent to manage her own affairs, but demonstrates superior judgment compared to many adults I've evaluated. The falsified medical records became the final nail in their coffin. Dr. Walsh had provided testimony via videotape deposition explaining how Margaret had pressured her to write evaluations that exceeded her professional relationship with me and violated ethical guidelines. Mrs. Hartwell asked me to state that Allison was showing signs of mental illness based on our casual interactions at family gatherings. Dr. Walsh testified, I declined to make such statements, but she somehow obtained a preliminary stress management recommendation I'd written and altered the language to suggest serious psychological concerns. As I concluded my presentation, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. Derek slumped in his chair, knowing his crimes would now face criminal prosecution. Margaret and Robert stared at their son with expressions of betrayal and disbelief, finally understanding how completely he'd manipulated their love and concern. Vincent Hayes sat motionless, calculating the damage to his reputation and potential disciplinary action from the State Bar Association. His 30-year career might not survive the ethical violations exposed in this courtroom. Judge Thompson's expression had shifted from judicial neutrality to barely contained outrage as the scope of the fraud became clear. The conservatorship petition hadn't just been baseless, it had been a criminal conspiracy designed to enable continued theft from a trust fund specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of family manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming, the fraud undeniable, and justice was finally within reach. But the personal cost of these revelations would echo through our family for years to come, shattering relationships and destroying the illusions that had held us together through decades of dysfunction and deception. Judge Thompson's voice cut through the courtroom silence with the authority of 30 years on the bench. Her decision carried the weight of absolute finality, each word carefully chosen to address not just the legal issues, but the profound betrayal that had been exposed. After reviewing the evidence presented in this case, this court finds the petition for conservatorship to be not only without merit, but based on fraudulent misrepresentation and criminal activity. She began her eyes moving deliberately from Derek to Margaret to Robert. The petition is hereby dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. The relief that washed over me felt like breathing again after being underwater for months. But Judge Thompson wasn't finished delivering justice. Furthermore, this court is referring the evidence of forgery fraud and financial elder abuse to the Hamilton County District Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation. She continued, "Derek Hartwell, you are ordered to surrender your passport and remain within the jurisdiction pending formal charges." Derek's lawyer leaned forward urgently, but Vincent Hayes was too busy calculating his own legal exposure to provide effective counsel. The conflict of interest revelations would likely result in disciplinary action from the State Bar Association, potentially ending his career. "Robert and Margaret Hartwell, you are hereby ordered to make full restitution to Allison Hartwell's trust fund for all unauthorized withdrawals, plus interest and penalties, as calculated by the court-appointed forensic accountant," Judge Thompson declared. "This restitution must be completed within 90 days, or additional legal action will be taken to recover these funds." The financial implications were staggering. Between Derek's theft, Robert's unauthorized use of trust assets as collateral, and Margaret's gambling losses funded by family money, the total owed exceeded $800,000. My parents faced potential bankruptcy and the loss of their family home to satisfy the judgment. As court security moved toward Derek, who had been sitting motionless throughout the judge's pronouncement, he finally looked directly at me. The brother I'd grown up with, the one I'd protected from playground bullies and helped with homework, met my eyes with an expression of resignation and something that might have been regret. "Allison," he called out as the officers approached his table. "I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just temporary loans I thought I could pay back quickly. But the more I lost, the more I needed, and the deeper I got." His voice cracked with genuine emotion for the first time in months. I told myself I was protecting the family by keeping everyone from knowing how bad it had gotten. I convinced myself that using your money temporarily was better than letting Mom and Dad lose their house to my creditors. Margaret began crying quietly, the full weight of her son's deception finally hitting her. Robert stared at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes as he processed how thoroughly Derek had manipulated his protective instincts. "But somewhere along the way, protecting my secret became more important than protecting you," Derek continued as the officers waited respectfully for him to finish. "I created this whole conservatorship plan to buy myself time and access to more money. I never stopped to think about what it would do to you or how it would make Mom and Dad unknowing accomplices to stealing your future." The handcuffs clicked around his wrists with finality. Derek looked back one more time as they led him from the courtroom, his expression carrying years of remorse that had been buried under desperation and addiction. In the weeks that followed, the legal aftermath reshaped our family's landscape completely. Derek pled guilty to multiple felony charges, including forgery, fraud, and financial abuse. His sentence included 5 years in state prison and mandatory participation in gambling addiction treatment programs. Vincent Hayes faced disciplinary hearings that resulted in suspension of his law license and substantial fines for ethical violations. His reputation in shambles, he eventually relocated to another state to rebuild his career under intense oversight. Margaret and Robert entered counseling to address both their financial irresponsibility and their enabling behavior toward Derek's addictions. The process was painful but necessary, forcing them to confront decades of denial about their son's problems and their own contributions to the family dysfunction. Professor Caldwell offered me a position with her consulting firm specializing in trust and estate law, with emphasis on protecting vulnerable beneficiaries from family manipulation. The irony of using my own experience to help others facing similar situations wasn't lost on me, but it felt like turning trauma into purpose. Murphy threw a party at the diner when the local newspaper ran the story about my legal victory. Regular customers who'd watched me study law books between refilling coffee cups cheered as I walked in, wearing my first new professional suit purchased with money from my now accessible trust fund. "Always knew you had it in you, kid," Murphy said, presenting me with a coffee mug inscribed Counselor Murphy's that would sit on my future law office desk for years to come. Takes guts to stand up to family when they're trying to tear you down. The trust fund, freed from my family's interference, had grown beyond my grandfather's original projections through careful investment management. The additional funds allowed me to establish the Nathan Hartwell Foundation, providing legal scholarships for first-generation college students pursuing law degrees while working full-time. Sarah from my study group became my first legal partner when we opened our practice specializing in family law and elder abuse cases. Marcus joined us after completing his criminal justice degree, bringing investigative skills and street smarts that complemented our legal training. 6 months after the trial, Margaret called to ask if we could meet for coffee. She'd been attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings and working with a financial counselor to address her addiction. The conversation was awkward and painful, but it marked the beginning of a slow healing process. "I need you to know that I genuinely believed we were protecting you." She said, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like an anchor. "Derek was so convincing about your supposed financial problems. He showed us fake bank statements and receipts that made it look like you were spending money recklessly." She paused, struggling with emotions that therapy was helping her process. "I realize now that I wanted to believe his stories because they made me feel needed and important. Being your protector felt better than admitting my own son was manipulating me." Robert joined us for subsequent meetings, slowly rebuilding trust through consistent actions rather than empty promises. They sold their house to satisfy the restitution judgment, moving into a modest apartment while working to repair their relationship with their only remaining child. Derek wrote letters from prison that I read but didn't answer for the first year. His words showed genuine remorse and understanding of the damage his actions had caused, but forgiveness would require time and proof of lasting change. The most satisfying moment came 18 months later when I argued my first major case before the Ohio Supreme Court, establishing legal precedent that would protect trust beneficiaries from family manipulation throughout the state. The ruling became known as the Hartwell Standard, requiring clear evidence of genuine incapacity and independent legal representation for proposed conservatees. As I stood in my law office that evening, looking at my diploma hanging beside my grandfather's photograph, I reflected on the painful journey that had brought me to this point. Nathan Hartwell's foresight in protecting my inheritance had given me the resources to fight back, but his greater gift was the example of integrity that guided my response to betrayal. The final life lesson crystallized as I prepared for another day of representing clients who face family manipulation and financial abuse. Family doesn't mean unconditional loyalty to those who betray you. Sometimes the greatest love is setting firm boundaries and demanding respect. My grandfather knew that true strength comes not from protecting people from consequences, but from building character that can face any challenge with integrity. Real family supports your dreams even when they don't understand them. They celebrate your achievements instead of undermining your confidence. They protect your interests instead of exploiting your trust. The people who truly love you want to see you succeed, not keep you dependent on their approval or financial support. Standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish or ungrateful. It makes you strong enough to build the life you deserve and wise enough to recognize the difference between people who lift you up and those who hold you down. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that behavior comes from people you've loved your whole life. My grandfather's trust fund gave me financial independence, but the real inheritance was the courage to demand better and the wisdom to know I deserved it. What experiences have taught you the most about setting boundaries with family members who don't have your best interests at heart? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and protecting yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like, subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges, and share it with anyone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they know. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it encourages you to stand up for yourself when it matters most. Remember, you deserve relationships built on respect and genuine care, not manipulation and control. Until next time, keep fighting for the life you deserve.